कभी करती हैं मुलाकातें, कभी करती हैं मुलाकातें, कभी यादों में बरसातें, किताबें करती हैं बातें, किताबें करती हैं बातें। मन की गहरी झील में कूद जाती हैं कभी, सोच के दरिया के संग संग बहती जाती हैं कभी। चाहे शाम हो या हो रातें, किताबें करती हैं बातें।
We have with us today Dr. Manosi Lahiri, eminent geographer and author of the book Mapping India. This is a book that tells the story of India through maps. Manosi, maps have been an abiding interest of yours. What inspired you to write this book?
What led to writing the book was the realization over time that we needed such a book to bring across the idea that India has been mapped over 500 years, and a lot of this information is not known to people who might be interested in cartography and in the mapping of the country. So I decided to put together information covering the historical development of mapping, not just maps, but mapping in India.
Your book points out that 500 years ago is when mapping started in earnest in India, and it were really the outsiders, people who came from the outside who were more interested in mapping the country. What do you think is the reason that Indians themselves had not really shown such an interest in cartography?
Indians did have a good understanding of their land. We've had pilgrimage as a system of people moving from one end of the country to the other for many, many years. So it's not as if that people were not interested in places or were not aware of distant lands. It's just that as a discipline, cartography was not one that was developed in India, not to the extent as it was developed in Western countries. So we have documents in India which speak about places which would today we would consider as the edges of the subcontinent, and yet there were no maps of those places. The truth is, the Indians were drawing graphics which we today called cosmographs. Cosmographs were designs and drawings about stories from our past, about how people imagined our land to be, and this is a tradition that you see which was well developed in Jain literature. But a cosmograph did not tell you about the land, how you could move from one place to the other or come back along the same route. So modern mapping of the country is something that came to us from the West.
And what happened that prompted the beginning of the mapping of India in earnest?
Several things happened. The first was that Vasco da Gama came and landed in Calicut. Once the route across the Cape of Good Hope to India was known by sea, then the countries from Europe who were interested in coming to India for trade, mainly to collect spices and textiles, and later of course opium and saltpeter and various other things, needed to go back. They needed to know how to take back the goods and the people safely to their countries. So the countries who were interested in trading with India in the 16th century and the 17th century, starting with the Portuguese and followed by the Dutch and the French, played a very significant role in the mapping of our seas and the coastal lands of India. Earlier people came to India by land across what we call the Middle East now. They travelled across the land and then by ship, sailing ship, through the Arabian Sea. So their needs were different from the people who were interested in navigating and coming to India. And we must remember, those were the days of the sailing ships. We did not have steamships then. So it was very important for the ship's captains to know which way the winds blow, because we are a monsoon country, so the winds blow in different season in opposite directions. So they needed to know about these winds, and these winds affected the ocean currents, so they needed to know about the ocean currents. They needed to know about the coastal lands where they could stop off and pick up vegetables and food for their for the people who were on board. So these were the reasons why slowly the Arabian Sea coast, and then shortly after the Bay of Bengal coastal lands of India were mapped. Of course, finally the interest was to know where they could source the products from, the ones that they needed to trade in.
There are some extremely beautiful maps that have been produced, and very rare and difficult to find maps in your book. And what particularly stand out are the maps made by the Frenchman Jean-Baptiste Joseph Gentil, and they're stunning. I mean, they're very artistically rendered. So what would you say about the skills that cartographers of the day had?
This is very interesting to think about it, because the cartographer of the times that you're speaking of, which is really the mid-18th century in India, was really an artist. He did not know very much mathematics or geodesy, which I would assume some of, certainly the French and the British already knew a fair bit about. And if you see these maps, they're of the Mughal period, but not made at the height of the Mughal period. And these maps were made by artists who were in the court of Shuja-ud-Dawla of Awadh. And if you see these maps, they are like miniature paintings, very detailed, beautiful. But not only do they show you place names and territories marked out, but what they do is they fill up areas of which there is no information with birds and animals. So you get the impression that this person has made a map about an area that he is well informed. So to distract you from the fact that in this area there is very little information, they put in these beautiful graphics. They have also on the edges of the maps, his particular maps, if you notice, on the edges have these beautiful pictures of myths, like the one from Aurangabad.
Yes.
Shows pilgrims going to the Ajanta and Ellora caves.
Yes.
The ones from Kabul show combat between people, between cock, between animals. So it brings to life what the place is like for people who have not visited that area.
You also mentioned something called phantom features. Could you please tell us what these were?
In the early days of mapping, cartographers were making maps based on information culled from other travelers or explorers, travel memoirs, basically what we call travelogues today. So they would read those and they would speak to people who have traveled far away and try and pick up important physical features of the places and put them into their maps. But we do know a lot of the explorers who came, adventurers, many of them were just adventurers. They came to faraway places and took back very exaggerated stories or unreal stories. Or sometimes the stories were true, but the cartographer didn't quite understand what it related to. So he would add features, and these features do not really exist on the ground, and that's why I refer to them as phantom features. They could be mountains, they could be lakes, rivers, places, cities, whatever. There are several examples, but the great example is of respectable, well-known atlas that was published by Ortelius, and this was in the mid-16th century. And he did not have a separate map for India, But what he did have was a map of Southeast Asia where India featured very well, prominently, but he had a lake, and out of this lake flowed 4 major rivers flowing south from the lake, and he called it Siame Lakes. Now, for a long time, this was repeated. Everyone who made a map after this for the next 150 years, I'd say more than that really, there was a lake with rivers flowing out of it. But this did not actually mean that it was completely imagined. It was just misrepresented of an idea, because if you think about it, there is a lake, Mansarovar, which is at the foot of Mount Kailash, and Mount Kailash is called Sumeru. So, Sume is probably Sumeru, and it's the lake, and around the Mount Kailash region are 4 sources of 4 important lakes, the Karnali, Satluj, Sangpo and the Indus. So, my belief is he would have heard of this, but he wouldn't know where to place that lake. So, he places the lake in the wrong place, and the idea of the 4 rivers originating from there comes from the idea that there are 4 rivers that originate near Mount Kailash. Similarly, the idea of Gomukh. If you look at several maps, but amongst them the earliest is Baffin's map. William Baffin was the person who cartographed Thomas Roe's map of India, and there he shows at Hardwar the head of a cow which he thinks is Gomukh, and for about 100 years almost all major European map publishers showed Gomukh at Hardwar. But in reality it's neither, well, it may be symbolized with the head of a cow, but the fact is that Gomukh is not there, it's near a Gangotri.
Yes.
So, sometimes these phantom features appeared in maps. There is a map by Linchoten, who actually had lived in Goa and worked there for several years, who drew the Western Ghats like the central mountain of the peninsula, and it just appeared in many maps after that.
Interesting. And now the great trigonometrical survey is you've mentioned in the book as being one of these great mapping exercises that was undertaken at a really massive scale. And also one of the outcomes of that was, of course, it was discovered that Mount Everest, that there was a mountain that was the highest in the world. So could you tell us something about this really massive exercise?
See, when the British won first the Battle of Plassey, and then they won, more importantly for the purpose of mapping history of the country, the Battle of Buxar was more important than the Battle of Plassey so far as we know documentation of the land went. Then after Buxar, they got the rights to collect revenues from the land. So it became very important for them to know how much land they had, what were the products they could source from there, how much tax they could collect. So they went into the first major exercise of surveying the Bengal Delta and Bihar. And after that, as they moved to different parts of India, from the presidency states, like say from Madras further inland into the peninsula, or from Bombay further into western India, they needed to similarly map those areas. But as they mapped those areas, they used local information and fixed them to what we call a local meridian. In the case of the east, it was Calcutta, for the south it was Madras, and for the west it was Bombay. Now, why did they need to do this? Is because you need to know in cartography, as in because cartography extends from surveying. In survey, you need to know what every place can be defined by a latitude and longitude, and they would look at the astronomical bodies and find their positions. But when this happened in several places, they couldn't link them together. So that was when, because the science of geodesy had advanced quite a lot by then, and the instruments to survey had advanced, the British East India Company then decided it was in their interest to conduct this trigonometrical survey so that all the places could be correctly placed.
And
it's a little complicated,
yes.
but it forms the framework and the basis
Yes.
for further mapping.
Yes. Another interesting issue your book throws light on is how the country was divided in 1947, how lines were drawn through maps.
Yes.
If you could briefly touch upon that.
Yes, in 1947, as you know, Hindustan, that was part of the British Empire, was the part that was ruled directly by the British Empire had to be divided, and the other states could choose whether they wanted to go to Pakistan or India. Now, to make this division, the British did not use the standard system as one uses for defining international boundaries. This was quite well laid out by then. You normally followed natural topographical features like, say, the ridge of a mountain or the river. In this case, because the divisioning was on the basis of religious majority, so they needed to know where these Muslim majority and non-Muslim majority areas were. So this could only be done by looking at the census that had collected that data, which was available at administrative units, which are tehsils or talukas as we call them. So it was the boundary of these that were used, and the commission that decided this was the Radcliffe Commission. The interesting thing is and therefore we call them the Radcliffe line. So the Radcliffe Commission determined where this line was. The problem was there was no map associated with the report of the Radcliffe Commission. It only listed the districts and the villages by name, but there was no map and there was no time. It was done in such a hurry for them to mark the ground with pillars, which is the normal method of marking a line between two different countries, the international boundary between two countries. There was no time for that, and that is why for a long time it was completely unknown what was the methodology that was followed to come to the decision of where the lines should be, both in the case of West Pakistan and India and East Pakistan. But in the mid-80s, Pakistan actually published those maps. So those are available. We know where the lines were drawn and on what maps between India and West Pakistan. But the documents for East Pakistan were not published by them, because by then Bangladesh had come into being, and we, at least the lay public, people outside of government, I don't think have seen those maps.
Manosi, it was a very interesting discussion. Thank you very much for being here today and for telling us something about the history of India through maps. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
This is from my latest book, Capital, and it describes a night when I'm driving home. I'm nearly at home when I see a peculiar sight. A woman in a glittery nightclub negligee is walking down the dark street, so unsteadily that it seems she might fall at any moment. And behind her, two men are following at walking pace on a motorbike. I'm not sure what to do. It's well after midnight and the woman seems oblivious to everything around her, not drunk, but flying on the wings of some other potion. I draw level and put down the passenger window. "Are you okay?" I ask. She looks in the window. She can't focus too well on my face. "What did you say?" "I just asked if you were okay." "Me? I'm fine." I watch her walk away. I put the window up. I look ahead, ready to drive on, and see that one of the men on the motorbike has run in front of my car, which he now proceeds to beat violently with both his palms. While he's doing so, the other man jerks open my car door and grabs my arm. "Get out!" "Why?" She's a prostitute. You are under arrest. For what? What did you say to her? I asked her if she was okay. How do you know her? I don't. Get out of the car. Who are you? With police. I get out of the car. I look around for the woman who seems to have completely disappeared. Driver's license? I can't believe the situation. I get my driver's license out and watch while he inspects it. Which country is this from? The UK, I say. You're British? Yes, I say. He looks at me strangely. He begins writing down the number of my driving license. While he's doing so, I hear my engine rev and turn around to watch my car being driven away by the other man. Where's he going? I cry. Police station. He's unperturbed. I am dumbfounded. He continues making his quiet notes. Then he hands me back my driver's license. Get on the bike. I climb on the back of the motorbike and he drives away at speed in the direction already taken by my car. We whiz round dark corners and out into the neon sea of the main road. A U-turn, a side road, more dark corners, and finally the police station. My car is meekly parked out front under a sign offering helpful advice to all who visit the Delhi police. A person who has no opinion will seldom be wrong. There seem to be two opposite conclusions to draw from this, and I honestly don't know which one is the intended. I am led into the ramshackle office, smelling of dust, sweat, and stamp pads. A policeman is sitting behind a desk. He seems happy to see me in his net. My captor briefs him. What were you doing this evening? The boss asks me. I was having dinner with friends. Girlfriends? He says, smiling. Friends. I can see he hopes I will turn out to be morally vulnerable. I resolve to act blasé. I don't have much money on me. So you leave one girlfriend and think you can pick up another girlfriend? I don't answer. Why would you stop to talk to a woman in the street in the middle of the night? We go over the details of the event again. He asks where I live, trying to place me in the Delhi galaxy. You never know with foreigners. Have you been drinking? He asks. No, I lie. Shall we go to the hospital and check? Okay, I say. This irritates him. What do you mean, okay? He barks. Show me your driver's license. I hand it to him and he makes a big show of inspecting every detail. I'm not going to give him the satisfaction of hanging on his opinions. I look around. I'm actually a bit fascinated by this place, which is the most dilapidated seat of state power imaginable. Wires spill out of empty light sockets. There's a cardboard ceiling in which holes have been rudely cut for the spinning fans to protrude. The walls are covered in phone numbers written at screwy angles, and behind every chair, dirty brown clouds where heads have leant. Someone has put up a sticker above a desk saying, "Sexy hot boy." In the corner of the room is a shrine with statues of various gods.